So it's the new year, and I'm sure your YouTube subscription boxes have been inundated with top 10 movies of 2022 lists over the past few days. So before we get into the premise of this video, I'm gonna go ahead and rattle those off. Number 10, RRR. Number 9, Navalny. Number 8, The Fabelmans. Number 7, Top Gun Maverick. Number 6, Avatar: The Way of Water. Number 5, Nope. Number 4, Marcel the Shell with Shoes On. Number 3, Tar. Number 2, Everything Everywhere All at Once. Number 1, Aftersun. Interested to hear my thoughts on any of those movies? Go ahead and check out my Letterboxd in the description. Now that that's out of the way, I want to talk about something a little different. Instead of talking about what I thought were the best films of 2022, I think I can better represent what this year in movies was like for me by talking about 5 movies that I watched for the first time this year. These aren't in any particular order other than how I simply chose to present them, and some of these aren't necessarily going to be full reviews of the film, but rather critical engagements that briefly focus on one aspect. In other words, I'll partly be talking about these films broadly, but I'll also be highlighting what I took away from them specifically. And these aren't necessarily the best 5 movies I watched in 2022, but from deserving a spotlight to provoking some interesting thoughts on my end, they're all here for a reason.
어떻게 생겼어?
그냥 뻔한 얼굴인데?
Long before Bong Joon-ho had entered the Western film canon with works such as Snowpiercer and Okja, much less become regarded as one of the greatest directors working today with Parasite, Bong first broke into the international conversation with his sophomore film, Memories of Murder. The film follows a group of detectives investigating a murder in a small town, and as they become more and more frustrated with their lack of leads, they reckon with their own methods and approach to justice, interpersonal relationships, and life in general. I truly don't understand why some people compare this to the likes of Zodiac or Seven, because Memories of Murder blows, or should I say drop kicks, both of these movies out of the water. Bong's incredible control of tone, melding goofball humor with the darkness of the narrative, is on full display here. While not necessarily as thematically rich as Parasite, it still has plenty to say about the culture of 1980s Korea, the urban-rural divide, and ends disappointingly in all the right ways. It's become an oft-repeated cliche that crime films work best when they show the depths of humanity, but Memories of Murder shows the effect that darkness has on those who purport to stand in the light, grappling with the reality that at the end of the day, time will not only kill our physical selves, but our spiritual selves. With perfect pacing and striking images complemented by a desaturated yet vivid palette, Memories of Murder might not be Bong's magnum opus, but I think it's my favorite of his works.
The cities, it's different. The cities are full of women, middle-aged widows, husbands dead, husbands who've spent their lives making fortunes, working and working. And then they die and leave their money to their wives, their silly wives.
Alfred Hitchcock's first film set in the United States, Shadow of a Doubt, creates a portrait of the underbelly of American suburban life through his classical training in German Expressionism. It's a haunting rumination on how you can never truly know anyone, even those you're closest to. Hitchcock creates a multi-layered narrative that appears to ostensibly be about murder, but it becomes even more sinister the further it's peeled back, bringing the audience to the grim realization that killing is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to humanity's depravity. Hitchcock himself considered it his finest work, and while it's lost that status in the cultural mainstream to works such as Vertigo, Psycho, and Rear Window, Shadow of a Doubt displays his signature formal techniques on full display. Much of the film's visual language is constructed through parallelism, from the mirror-like set design to the 2 leads sharing the same name. Objects are traded back and forth, carrying their connotations to each character's situation and reapplying themselves thematically. This parallel structure grows stronger as the film goes on, as sequences begin to repeat with new context that twists the simple comforts of suburban life into something deeply unsafe and unsettling. This language peaks with the ultimate parallel, that of the symmetry of the human body and how emotional violence can manifest physically. It's a suffocating horror of a film, and every viewing gives a new detail that starts with formal appreciation and ends in that increasing sense of dread and violated state of being. In other words, it's Hitchcock. Sometimes slapstick just slaps. I fully expected to come out of modern times appreciating it, but having no actual connection to it whatsoever. I think that's how the vast majority of people, even many self-attested film snobs, begin to feel the further back in cinematic history you go. Old movies, especially silent film, can feel like homework sometimes, and that's a frame of mind that services no one. What I did not expect, however, was to totally laugh out loud at this multiple times. When it takes its satirical edge to the jugular of the industrialized world, the film is at its best. In particular, the automated feeding machine makes a great commentary about the ways in which the labor market can strip someone of their autonomy. I love the opening image of the film too. Beginning with a herd of running lambs and fading into a shot of people walking into a New York subway is striking. It solidifies that despite the silliness of much of the film's comedy, it's making the argument that as long as we conform to the ways of the modern world, we're little more than lambs being led to the slaughter. It really puts into perspective so many of these class-based satires we got this year. As much as these films may seem of the moment and timely with their criticism, Chaplin said it all and more 87 years ago.
Now I'm going to tell you about a scorpion.
You know, there's something captivating about Orson Welles' obsession with authenticity and facade, originality and imitation. After all, his final film, no less than 3 can claim that title, but I'm referring to F for Fake here, is entirely dedicated to the subject. It makes sense. He rose to prominence after his radio broadcast of War of the Worlds deceived a good chunk of the public into believing that we were actually under attack from Martians, and even that little story is greatly exaggerated. It's a theme that ties his whole filmography together. Mr. Arkadin, or Confidential Report as it's been retitled on re-releases, fits into this motif quite nicely, because Welles just decided to make what is ostensibly a rip-off of Citizen Kane. But what's even more incredible, or incredulous, you decide, is that he did it really, really well. The film is nearly identical in form to Kane, and most of its beats land in the same places. What it lacks in soul and heavy thematic substance, it makes up for in noir panache and sharp narrative focus. While Welles doesn't take center stage here, his supporting turn as the titular Arkadin infects even the frames where he isn't present, and that's largely attributable to how Welles composes his own scenes. Like Kane, Arkadin is often framed from a low angle, and while in both cases this creates a sense of larger-than-life power, the result differs. Kane towers over everyone and everything, pursuing an Ubermensch league of grandeur. Arkadin, however, conveys fear rather than grandiosity, looming over protagonist Van Straten as he unravels Arkadin's past and gets dangerously close to the truth. Just as Citizen Kane's central critique is focused in particular, famously depicting William Randolph Hearst, Mr. Arkadin is widespread and all-encompassing. It uses that thematic idea of inauthenticity and facade and turns it toward anyone who creates a fiction around themselves, revealing the sadness and desperation that comes from creating a public persona. It feels directed at this archetype of character, but it's applicable to any of us who put on a face when we get up in the morning. Mr. Arkadin may owe much of its cinematic form to its director's prior opus, but it finds more than enough room to stand on its own 2 feet.
You're a kite dancing in a hurricane, Mr. Bond.
I feel absolutely insane saying this, but I think that Spectre is better than Skyfall. Skyfall's main issue is how it uses tone to set the audience's suspension of disbelief to its detriment. From the opening scene, we're told to interpret this as a real movie, unlike those other silly films in the series. Bond is placed in genuine danger in a tensely edited sequence that provides true weight to the implications of the actions its characters take. After the title sequence, we are told, 2 films deep mind you, that Bond is past his prime and needs to grapple with being phased out and decommissioned, and establishes his internal conflict as pushing himself beyond what he is now capable of, trying to live up to his own mythicality. We are presented with Silva, a villain posited as Bond's other half, a reflection on what it's like to be MI6's star agent, only to be chewed up and left to die by the very same system that Bond prides himself on serving. Then, the film does practically nothing with these ideas. Its narrative and set pieces are as contrived as ever, but it lets you down because it promised you that it was going to be something more than simply wasn't. Skyfall tells its audience that it is a character piece first, and an action film second. Spectre tells you the opposite, and to great benefit. Spectre's plot is equally, if not more so, contrived. Using one of Bond's most iconic villains to string together the previous 3 films into one large retconned narrative is just as ridiculous as one would expect. The film is comfortable with making this leap, and it lets the audience know that it's okay for them to be as well. The script is witty and stupid in a good way. The humor here is generated in the edit.
What do we do now?
What I mean to say is that Spectre shows that the Craig era finally knows how to be a Bond movie. This series has finally realized that it's okay to feel comfortable in its own skin. This is reflected in Bond's characterization too. Craig's portrayal moves away from the brooding trouble agent a la Reacher or Bourne. This is the most suave, goofy, charming, and well, Bond he's ever been. He's even allowed to do some of his Bondisms in order to have a goddamn vodka martini, shaken, not stirred. I love Casino Royale, but having Bond say I don't give a damn when he asked how he likes his drink screams of gritty mid-2000s franchise reboot syndrome. It isn't unnatural, however. After 3 movies of Bond becoming Bond, whatever the hell that means anymore, this feels like a plausible development for his character. He's done the outsmart the first big baddie and take his first life with Casino Royale. He's done the painful production hell snooze fest with Quantum of Solace. They even jumped the gun on the aging hero trope with Skyfall. And now, where else can Bond go except to the character that he's been for the past 50 years? Before No Time to Die, it was clear why many people thought that Spectre was going to be Craig's final outing. In an era where franchises run away from their roots as fast as possible in an attempt to make something new before inevitably relying on callbacks for the hardcore fans to build a sustainable audience, Spectre concludes that the only place for Bond to go back to is where he started, driving off into the sunset in an Aston Martin with a smoking blonde. And for a series that's been hell-bent on redefining its character, that's certainly an odd place to be, but it's not an unreasonable one. And those are 5 films in 2022 that inspired some interesting thoughts on my end, and represent a nice cross-section of where my year in cinema has been. If you had some interesting watches this year, share them down below in the comments, and I'll see you all next time.